Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most captivating and honestly most stubborn mysteries out there, the crystal skulls. So, are we looking at genuine ancient relics from lost worlds, or is this just one of history's most elaborate archaeological hoaxes? Let's find out. What if a perfectly carved crystal skull held the secrets of an ancient civilization? For over a century, that single question has fueled some wild tales of lost worlds and hidden knowledge. They've completely captured our collective imagination in a super cinematic way, right? They make us stop and wonder, just for a second, if ancient forgotten technology or even magic actually exists. But to get to the actual truth, we gotta strip away all that myth. Who really made them? How old are they? And why are they still so insanely controversial today? All right, Section 1, the suspects. Let's look at 3 of the most famous artifacts. So there isn't just one mysterious skull floating around out there. The big 3, the ones you always hear about, are housed in the British Museum, the Smithsonian, and the Mitchell-Hedges collection. And what makes these specific skulls so jaw-dropping is just how incredibly pristine the craftsmanship is. Look, quartz crystal is ridiculously tough. It hits a 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, but it's also famously prone to fracturing. So it literally boggles the mind trying to figure out how human hands could carve something so utterly perfect out of solid quartz without, just shattering it into a million pieces. Moving on to Section 2, the legend and their sudden rise to fame. Now here's the thing. These objects didn't just slowly emerge from the historical record. No, they pretty much appeared out of thin air. Right around the late 19th and early 20th centuries, these skulls suddenly exploded onto the scene. And almost immediately, these massive, bold claims started circulating. People were completely convinced they were forged by the ancient Maya or Aztec civilizations, instantly tying them to this deeply romanticized Mesoamerican past. But the story hit absolute legend status thanks to this adventurer named Frederick Albert Mitchell-Hedges and his adopted daughter, Anna. They didn't just walk in with a cool artifact. They brought a full-blown blockbuster movie script. Anna claims she literally found their perfectly clear skull tucked away under a collapsed Mayan altar on her 17th birthday. What are the odds? It was exactly this kind of highly sensational, super specific backstory that took a piece of carved rock and turned it into a massive global phenomenon. Which brings us to Section 3, the hype, and the massive surge of New Age beliefs. As the decades rolled by, the whole narrative shifted completely away from history and went straight into the supernatural. I guess it really taps into that deep human desire to believe in magic, right? The hype basically exploded into 4 main camps. First, you had believers claiming the skulls had these intense healing powers. Then, others swore they could unlock psychic abilities. And then, a really massive chunk of people tied them straight to the lost city of Atlantis, basically arguing these things were ancient computers holding all the forgotten data of highly advanced civilizations. They weren't just carved rocks anymore. They were full-on mystical devices. All right, Section 4. Time for the reality check. Because when we actually sit down and put these fantastic, wild origins up against reality, well, it's pretty sobering. Despite an entire century of Maya, Aztec, and Atlantis legends running wild, the actual, documented archaeological record, it tells a completely different story. We're talking 0 historical texts, 0 verifiable dig site records, and absolutely no established context to back up any of these myths. Let's be super clear about the scientific consensus on this. The field of archaeology firmly, and I mean firmly, rejects the ancient origin stories attached to these artifacts. Researchers have found absolutely 0 evidence of Mesoamerican origins, 0 connections to Atlantis, and, shocker, 0 proof of supernatural abilities. It is just an incredibly stark contrast between what we all kind of desperately want to believe and what science can actually prove. And that brings us to Section 5, the ultimate cliffhanger. Because the real question we have to ask, the one that basically shatters this entire legendary narrative, is were they ancient at all? Or are they entirely modern creations crafted entirely to pull the wool over our eyes? Modern science is about to step in and challenge literally everything people thought they knew about these skulls. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are we actually searching for the truth, or do we just love a really good story? You definitely won't want to miss what happens next. Join us for part 2 of this explainer, where we'll reveal exactly what researchers found when they finally put these legends under the microscope. So until next time, keep asking those tough questions.
Welcome to today's explainer. I am so excited for this one because today we're taking an incredibly famous historical enigma and putting it directly under the scientific microscope. Yep, we are talking about the legendary crystal skulls. For decades, these captivating quartz carvings have just completely captured our collective imagination. They've popped up in best-selling books, blockbuster movies, usually involving a certain fedora-wearing archaeologist, and spawned literally countless theories about lost ancient civilizations. But hey, we aren't here to just repeat the campfire stories. We're here to separate fact from fiction. We are going to look strictly at what the physical, scientific evidence tells us about where these objects actually came from, how they were made, and who really made them. It's a journey that takes us from the realm of pure fantasy right into the cold, hard reality of modern laboratory analysis. Ready? Let's get into it.
For decades, the crystal skulls were surrounded by mystery. But when scientists finally examined them using modern technology, the results surprised almost everyone. Mystery meets modern science. Okay, let's back up for a second and briefly recap the legendary aura that surrounded these artifacts before the scientific community finally stepped in. For a very long time, these skulls were widely presented as the ultimate ancient relics. The story went that they were the absolute masterpieces of pre-Columbian civilizations, like the Aztecs or the Mayans. Supposedly, they were discovered hidden deep within overgrown jungle ruins, humming with ancient magic or some sort of long-lost technology. They were beautiful, sure, but they were also incredibly eerie, and honestly, they were completely devoid of any real, modern context when they first started showing up in public. And you know what? That total lack of context was the perfect blank canvas for mystery to spread like wildfire.
Which brings us to the core question that fueled decades of intense speculation. You really have to ask yourself, could an ancient Mesoamerican civilization truly craft these flawless quartz artifacts? I mean, quartz is an incredibly hard material. Crafting a perfectly proportioned human skull out of a single solid block of clear crystal using only the tools we know ancient Mesoamerican cultures actually possessed, well, it seemed almost impossible. It would have required a seemingly unimaginable amount of time, precision, and effort, and that perceived impossibility is exactly what gave rise to the idea that some sort of lost technology, or maybe even outside intervention, just had to be involved in their creation.
Inside the laboratory. So to actually answer that lingering question, researchers from major museums and independent experts decided enough was enough. It was time to look past the wild stories and look directly at the stone itself. They realized that the only way to crack the mystery of the crystal skulls was to analyze the physical objects using the absolute most advanced modern technology available. They needed to stop treating these skulls as magical artifacts and start treating them as material evidence. Evidence that could be objectively tested, measured, and observed at a microscopic level.
So what did they do? Well, the scientific approach was a brilliant three-pronged attack. First up, electron microscope analysis. This allowed researchers to zoom in incredibly close to the surface of the quartz to look at the minute physical details of the carving process, which directly led them to step 2, identifying the unique signatures of the tool marks left behind. You see, every carving tool leaves a highly specific microscopic trace. It's like a fingerprint. Finally, step 3. They conducted quartz sourcing studies. This was absolutely crucial to determine the exact geographical origin of the raw crystal used to make the skull.
And here is where the ancient illusion completely shatters. Ancient Mesoamericans were undeniably master stone carvers, for sure. But they used hand-carving methods, utilizing stone, bone, wood, and abrasive sand. That specific method leaves very irregular, distinct scratches. But when researchers looked closely at the crystal skulls, they found perfectly uniform, circular marks. Those are the undeniable telltale signatures of high-speed, mechanized jeweler's wheels. We are literally talking about modern rotary carving equipment that simply did not exist in ancient Mesoamerica. No way around it.
The 19th century truth. So those rotary tool marks, combined with the quartz sourcing studies, which, by the way, showed the crystal likely came from regions completely inaccessible to ancient Mesoamericans, pointed scientists to one very specific conclusion. Specialists now widely agree that several of the most famous crystal skulls were not carved thousands of years ago in the Americas. Actually, scratch the ancient theory entirely. They were likely produced in Europe, specifically during the late 19th century.
Tracing this timeline, a crystal-clear picture emerges. Let's walk through it. In the late 1800s, highly skilled lapidary workshops in Europe, workshops fully equipped with those modern rotary carving tools we just talked about, produced these remarkable quartz skulls. Then, moving into the early 1900s, antiquities dealers and wealthy private collectors began snapping them up and popularizing them. But they weren't introduced to the public as modern European carvings. Oh no, they were pitched as ancient, mysterious relics. It actually wasn't until the 2000s, when modern laboratory analysis finally caught up with the myth, that their true European origins were completely uncovered.
Commerce shaped the legend. We absolutely have to understand how the antiquities market drove this myth. Dealers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were constantly hunting for spectacular items to sell to museums and ultra-wealthy collectors. Now, a beautifully carved crystal skull is an impressive object on its own, right? But a beautifully carved crystal skull that was supposedly used in ancient, blood-soaked Aztec rituals? Wow, that is an artifact that commands a massive price tag. The dealers and collectors who traded these objects contributed heavily to their popularity by eagerly embracing and amplifying these incredibly exotic backstories. Essentially, they transformed ordinary, albeit highly skilled, modern carvings into highly sought-after, priceless antiquities.
Myths, commerce, and legend. As those three things intertwined, we have to confront the genuinely wild stories that grew around these objects as they changed hands over the decades. Once the skulls were out in the world, totally disconnected from their actual European makers, human imagination completely took over the wheel. The basic lie that they were ancient Mesoamerican artifacts was just the foundation. Over the course of the 20th century, the legends surrounding the crystal skulls became incredibly elaborate, feeding right into various cultural fascinations and New Age movements.
I mean, the lore spiraled completely out of control. Suddenly, these weren't just carvings anymore. People claimed they were alien technology gifted from the stars, or maybe surviving relics from the lost city of Atlantis. Some even claimed they were ancient computer hard drives humming with hidden knowledge and supernatural energy that could heal or destroy. They even got wrapped up in apocalyptic Mayan prophecies, especially around the year 2012. These ideas just grew and grew into a massive mythological complex all their own.
Now, why does this matter? Well, it's a fascinating tale of two extremes. On one hand, we have this massive cultural footprint. We're talking mountains of books, documentaries, and huge blockbuster movies promoting this magical lore. On the other hand, we have stark reality. Zero supporting archaeological evidence. None. Not a single famous crystal skull has ever been excavated by an archaeologist in a documented scientific dig at an ancient site. They all just magically appeared in the hands of dealers or collectors. So despite their massive popularity in pop culture, the sensational ideas surrounding them are completely, 100% unsupported by the archaeological record.
Let's take a second to really reflect on what we should take away from all this. The true fascination of the crystal skulls isn't that they're ancient magical relics, because, well, they aren't. The true fascination is what they teach us about ourselves. They show us exactly how our public understanding of history is actively shaped. It's shaped by compelling myths that we desperately want to believe. It's shaped by commerce and the desire to sell a highly profitable story. It's shaped by popular culture that amplifies the absolute most entertaining version of events. And ultimately, thankfully, it is grounded by rigorous scientific investigation, which eventually brings us right back to the truth.
The crystal skulls remind us that history is often more complex than legend. Sometimes the greatest mystery is not whether an artifact has magical powers, but how an ordinary object became an extraordinary story. This has been Mystery Vault. Until next time, keep questioning history.